Hi, everyone. Welcome to Heart of the Matter. I am your host, Elizabeth Vargas, and welcome to our first podcast of 2021. I am very happy to see the end of 2020. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know I do. I'm sure hoping that this year is a lot better than last year for so many reasons. Among them, in 2020, we know that women reported drinking more often and reported drinking more alcohol when they were drinking. In fact, in women, we have dramatically steeper increases in alcohol use and in risky drinking and in alcohol use disorder. And for years, we've already known that women have been the fastest growing demographic becoming dependent on alcohol. And so I'm really excited today because we're going to do sort of a female-centric podcast about women and their relation to alcohol with my special guest, Holly Whitaker, who wrote a book called Quit Like a Woman and has founded an online recovery community called Tempest that people can pay a price, join, and sort of link up with other women and who are also looking to manage or remove drinking from their lives. And Holly points out a couple of interesting statistics in her book that alcohol is the #1 date rape drug, that half of all sexual assaults involve alcohol, and get this, 90% of college campus rapes involve alcohol. I know I've done a zillion specials when I was working for ABC News on 2020 about terrible cases of girls who drank way too much, passed out, often were assaulted. It's a story we've seen in the news a lot. Now, in full disclosure, in some circles, Holly Whitaker is controversial. Her approach to sobriety is unique, and she's been very critical of Alcoholics Anonymous, calling it patriarchal and old-fashioned. And in doing that criticism, she's enraged a lot of people who say AA saved their lives. She wrote a really controversial editorial in the New York Times criticizing AA, and we wanted to give her a chance to defend her position and to explain her take on this. So my guest today is Holly Whitaker, talking about what it means to be a sober woman and the powerful role that alcohol plays in so many women's lives. Holly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So I have read your book. I've read all these articles that you've written. I've even, a couple friends of mine, believe it or not, are part of your Tempest group.
Oh, okay.
One of them is part of your Tempest group and is a member of AA. So I interviewed her.
Okay.
And I'm just, I've been seeing a lot online lately about this sober curious movement. And you said that you started Tempest and wrote this book to address that sort of gray area of women who have a problem with their own drinking, but maybe don't self-identify as alcoholics. What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't know if I really coined the term gray area drinking. That was something that Jolene Park did and really specifically focuses on. So I want to be clear about that. I had severe alcohol use disorder. It was going to kill me. And so I didn't start this because I found myself in this very weird area where alcohol was just kind of bad. It was killing me. But
it was really bad for you.
It was extremely bad. Yeah. Severely. And so but for me also, one of the things that was really interesting was even in all of that sickness, and I'm sure you understand what I'm saying, like there was so much rationale for, well, it's not that bad. There were ways that I could actually, and that's cognitive dissonance, there were ways that I could actually find, like, well, I'm kind of like, my friends when I go out, or I'm doing this thing similarly. And I think that negotiating the term alcoholic and negotiating alcohol use disorder, like going there to the diagnosis, instead of just asking ourselves, wow, is alcohol maybe like making my depression worse or making me do things that make me feel absolutely ashamed or hateful, or whatever? Is it showing up in a way that's actually negatively impacting my life? And so I think when we have to negotiate that word, which has, historical baggage, it's a loaded word. It means a lot of things. And I think when you have
Word
to
alcoholic.
first, the word alcoholic, that's right. When you have to negotiate the word alcoholic in order to receive treatment, I think that sets us up to wait for a really long time to be able to do that. And it's true, it takes on average about 10 years from onset of addiction, not onset of drinking, but onset of addiction to seeking treatment. 10 years on average to seek treatment.
Where did you get that statistic?
Oh gosh, I'll send the link to the article, to the study after this.
Okay.
But it's a published statistic. I had heard 7 years from therapists over the years that were part of our program. And we did research on it because I published it the statistic in my book, but it's 10 years. And so regardless of what that exact number is, it takes a long time for people to really get comfortable with what it means to actually confront addiction. If you have to absorb a label to do it.
There is so much stigma around the disease of alcoholism in our society. Do you think that by not focusing so much on that term alcoholic, that you are trying to help people find a way to look for help, ask for help without having to engage in that stigma?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that you still have to deal with the stigma of having addiction. You still have to, just because I questioned that terminology, doesn't mean I didn't have to deal with the stigma of what comes with having had an addiction. I think that that's a territory that we all have to navigate. I think that by allowing myself to not use that word or have to use that word to define who I am, how I live, what I may or may not be, what I can or cannot do. I think that it has opened up my own experience to something that's far greater than I could have imagined coming in.
Do you think you're an alcoholic?
No, I don't drink alcohol. I haven't had alcohol in 7 years. And so I don't.
But you do think you were addicted to alcohol?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because it does seem that when somebody says I'm an alcoholic, that then that definition of that person trumps everything else. Like,
oh yeah,
you're no longer a journalist, you're no longer a network news anchor,
That's
you're
right.
no longer a
You're
mother,
this.
You're an alcoholic.
That's right. And I think that is, we could spend hours and hours talking about this, but I think it is one of those things that historically, right, like written into, so the term alcoholic was really made a popular term by Alcoholics Anonymous. And written into the big book, is this idea that if you cannot come to terms, if you like that, those people that cannot accept this label, truly, like that's what it says. If you cannot accept this label, then you're in denial and then you're an unfortunate. Versus, so built into our ideas of recovery is this acceptance of being this thing and remembering that you're this thing. And it's so interesting over the years because I've had a very public relationship with my recovery. I've been very public about my recovery. I have been, people want me to take that label on. I've been called dry drunk. It's been used to like explain my behavior, my way of being, even when I don't use the label. And so it's a powerful, powerful word. And I think dictionary.com just recently removed alcoholic and addict from its use. The Associated Press actually changed their guidelines years ago to remove addict and alcoholic. And I think that it's one of those words we're not at the reclamation point yet around. I think it's one of those words that it's just so truly, I think, destructive when it's blanketly laid on another individual. That it is important for us to each question whether or not we use it or apply it to ourselves.
Tell me about your relationship with alcohol. You started drinking when you were pretty young. You're very graphic in your book about your description of how bad it got.
Yeah.
How bad did it get for our listeners who haven't yet read your book, Quit Like a Woman?
Well, I had an eating disorder as well. So I was and I was smoking a lot of cigarettes and a lot of pot, and also working 80 hours a week. And so I was pumping things in and out of my body to regulate myself. And so as far as bad as it got to the point where I had blood in my poop, and I was coughing up black phlegm, and I was binging and purging like $1,000 worth of food a week. I was just, again, coming back to this, I could clean it up, pull myself together, and make it work and show up. Less and less, but I think it's amazing because I can drink I can feel what a Diet Coke does to me now when I drink it. Like I can actually feel the effects of aspartame or whatever's in it. And I had desensitized myself so much that
how were you able, you are what we call highly functioning,
severely,
while you were abusing your body in so many ways, but specifically when it comes to drinking, I kept thinking when I was reading your descriptions of waking up, with a whiskey bottle in your hand. And, it was just, I thought, how did she get up and function that day?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I think because I had no other choice. And I had for so many years, I think, gone back and forth between really, I'm an extremist, and I'm a big person, and I don't do anything half-assed, including my work. And so I think there was just as much of a commitment to my work as there was to hurting myself. And so I felt I had absolutely no other choice. It's also why I felt rehab wasn't a choice, because I didn't feel I had the ability to leave my job.
So how did you quit?
Very slowly. I think I started to have, at Tempest, we use this idea of like a recovery journey. Like there's the point of ether where you just have no concept. You're just in it, and you have no concept that something might be wrong on the surface. And then you move into inkling, and things just start hitting you a little differently. And I remember, and I wrote about this in the book, being in Mexico with my friend Jeff, and having him talk about one of his friends who was an alcoholic, and it just being so clear that was my story. And I think there was just this slow unfolding and realization. And then it really did get to the point where I got so exhausted and so tired of keeping it up and of what I was doing to myself. And you know that AA slogan, like sick and tired of being sick and tired, is so true. And I think I had, and I wrote about this in the book too, just this one morning where I woke up and I had just been on a bender for a number of days, and I had to go in and lead. I had 20 different reports at that point in time, and I had to go in and lead a meeting, and I just couldn't do it. And so I had this moment of really just falling on the floor and asking God. It was so extremely cliche, and just for a reason, because it's a real moment, and just begging for the pain to end and begging for help. And I think there was just from that shift in my willingness, I truly believe that just this, like, it was a clear moment of saying, I need help and I need to do something differently for real. And from there, I had small interventions. I found a really terrible therapist, but that was something. And I found books, I found this woman, her name is Gabby Bernstein. I read an article about her in Bloomberg, my business magazine that I read every week. And she was like somebody that was in recovery. So just like that, little tiny things slowly over time added up and created the ability for me to make small changes that became bigger changes.
Maybe because recovery is done personally and privately, and sometimes the drinking is done extravagantly and publicly, people see the drunk behavior or the
Yeah.
drinking, the excessive drinking going on. They don't see the recovery. And I don't think people really realize. I mean, we have society all the time, people in society. I had people tell me this, just stop drinking. I had my doctor, my
Right.
GP said to me, Liz, he calls me Liz, Liz, just stop drinking for a
Just stop
year
doing it.
and then you can go back to it. And it was like, are you crazy? I can't just stop.
No.
That was the problem.
Because it's also how you're keeping yourself together. I mean, it's the thing that's killing you, but it's also the only thing that I mean, for me, I did not know how to function without all of these different things. I had to learn how to not use them. And that's extremely important to understand. It's one of the things we talk about is just thanking these things for getting you through. They got me through traumas and heartbreaks and challenges and so, and so many things. So
You did try AA, you write in your book, and that it
mhm.
didn't work for you. Why didn't it work?
Well, I'd already quit drinking. I started using AA 6 months after I had that moment on the floor. And I did it because I really truly was afraid of drinking again. I had been trying for 6 months. And it's very scary, I think, when no matter if it's, I think any mistakes that you make, we know when we call relapse, when you've had a period of time where you were able to pull something together and then you lose that, you just have this endless, like this bottomless pit of, I'm never going to make this work. This was my one shot and I am, going to kill myself. And I was at that point where I did not want to fail myself again. I didn't want to let myself down in that way. And I didn't know what else to do. And I felt like it was and this is what's so paradoxical about the label alcoholic, because I needed to go through that process. And I did need to hit that, this is not cute. This is not a thing I'm doing. That's just as a health trend. This is my life. And I need to confront it and take it as seriously as it is. And that was, for me, a very big moment in having that ceremony and that rite of passage of I am moving through this threshold into this space of taking this thing as seriously as it is and doing whatever it takes to not drink. And at the same time, I had done so much research around, neurobiology and different recovery modalities, and also just the power of agency, of developing a sense of choice in our healing. I did not believe that calling myself an alcoholic or going through the 12 steps, or really what was happening, having other people tell me if I didn't follow this one path, I was going to drink. That felt like at extreme odds with what had helped me not to drink.
How many times did you go before you pulled the plug?
I went for a couple of months. And at first, I think I went for I went every day for the first few weeks to different meetings at lunch. And then
So it wasn't like you tried one or two meetings and called it quits. You gave it the good college try.
Yeah. And I also found it, it was helpful until it wasn't. And I had enough of a breakup with it that I could understand a degree of what other people must go through that have been using a program for years, that then start to question it. And that same sense of how terrifying it is to question something that other people think is what you should be doing and is what is keeping you from drinking. And that was a very real and very terrifying aspect of not using AA. Was trusting myself.
So what did you do after you left AA? Did you go, I'm just curious how you get from there to starting this group, Tempest, and writing this book, Quit Like a Woman.
So it wasn't, all along, I think, like I said, and it was bit by bit. So I started to see a therapist and I started to see a better therapist. I found massage. I had somebody touch my body and give me stomach massage. I I started to read extremely inspiring texts. I started going to church. I started to hang out with different people. I started to hold boundaries for myself. I started to go to yoga classes. I learned to meditate. I mean, I could go on and on. All that was happening from that, October 2012. I gave my life to my recovery, truly. And it was the only thing that mattered to me, was to heal myself. And I worked at a healthcare company. I was a director at a healthcare company, and I was truly in the thick of what, we now know as health tech. And I also, at the time of Obamacare coming out, and or the Affordable Care Act, and I had the privilege of seeing really how the healthcare system was assembled, and how it just failed on a general basis, but also really specifically how it failed things like addiction and mental health. And for me, having access, and still does, absolutely. And having access, I had great insurance. All my friends were doctors. I had extreme access, and I couldn't use my insurance card to get the treatment that I needed. And I knew more than my doctors. I knew far more about addiction recovery than any mental health professional or medical doctor I encountered, which was just shocking. And so I started doing what I was doing because I wanted to I wanted to curate and aggregate information. And also I wanted to really call alcohol into the ring. I believed that part of what needed to exist within recovery was not this subsection of society of people that had lost their privilege of drinking alcohol and were these like sad, tried it, but couldn't make alcohol work. And the rest of, society, AKA normies, had figured out how to make, I felt absolutely compelled to talk about alcohol the same way that we talk about cigarettes. Not as a substance.
That's part of your book, actually, where you insist on calling it ethanol. And I think if the waiter walked up and said, "Would you like a glass of ethanol with your meal?" I don't think
no,
the feeling.
No. Yes, yeah. I believed it was so important, and I had seen. I was just talking about this today. I had seen a Dr. Oz show where this woman she'd had some facial reconstruction, and she had smoked her whole life, and she stops and she goes, "Hey kids, if you haven't started smoking yet, don't. And if you do, stop now." And I was just laughing because one of my friends, Andoset Johnson, who wrote the book, Not Drink. Oh my God, why can't I think of it? Anyways, who wrote a beautiful book on drinking. And she and I had been talking, and she had said, or maybe she had said on her TED Talk or something, that she felt that she had lost her privilege. And she felt that she had lost her ability to drink. And here's this woman who had quit smoking, and we were all applauding her for overcoming this thing. And she's telling other people not to start. And then you have this other woman who had overcome the same thing and who were like, "Oh, too bad you can't do that anymore." And I found it so perplexing, and I really wanted to change that narrative so that there was a pride in, oh yeah, we don't do that anymore. We were able to like get over and get away, just like we applaud people that quit cigarettes.
There is such a huge part of our culture that celebrates drinking, and especially drinking for women. I remember the book "Sippy Cups Are for Chardonnay" and "Nap Time is the New Happy Hour." And in fact, actually, you write about this in your book. I want to read this part. "As a result of pink booze, rosé all day, Alka Pops, Mommy's Timeout wine, and Kettle One sponsored Goop events and podcasts, our livers are failing, our rates of addiction are doubling, and women are the new binge drinkers." It's pretty extraordinary. The stats are between 2002 and 2013, the rate of alcohol use disorder in women increased by 84%.
Yep.
It almost doubled.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, it's quite interesting. I think there's a couple. I mean, my theory around it is, one, just targeted marketing. I mean, there is. I talk about this as well. There's Jane Walker. There's a feminist whiskey for us. I do believe that the same as cigarettes were sold to us as a symbol of feminist rebellion. that alcohol,
Virginia Slims.
but the
Right.
Lucky Strike first and foremost was sold to us as truly like a torch. It was labeled the torch of freedom. We were lighting up cigarettes, and that was very different than what, our puritanical moralistic society had told us to do. Women used to be arrested for smoking in public, and then all of a sudden we're lighting up cigarettes in the early 1900s to show parity with men. And I think that that's the same thing that has been sold to us. And you don't have to look further than the New Yorker last week. There's a woman that's sitting at her desk and she's got a martini glass. Or you don't have to look further than the Queen's Gambit. Like, powerful women take drugs, drink. It's part of
and pay a big price for it.
Pay a big price, but it's still glamorized. If you go to any sort of advertisement around the Queen's Gambit, she's surrounding herself with these beautiful jeweled bottles of alcohol, or the green, like this beautiful green pill that matches, the background or mid-century background. I think it still is part of this glamorization of strong women, powerful women. And so I think there's just that part of that imagery and conditioning that we drink to deal. And you see that in COVID. As I actually haven't seen it at the fever pitch it has been in the past year in a while, which is just, are you homeschooling your kids? Are you stressed? Are you, whatever it is, make a cocktail. And also now you can drink it anytime during the day and it's fine. And it's just been, I think, an overwhelming saturation of this idea that women specifically need to drink to live, socialize, do anything.
I actually will just take issue with your characterization of the Queen's Gambit, which I loved, by the way. I thought it actually showed her addiction pretty horrifically. It might have originally glamorized, the drug and alcohol use, but you saw the terrible consequences. It made me feel lucky that I'm sober when I watched that series. But I'm curious. We keep hearing people say that during this pandemic, the rates of alcohol and drug use have gone up. Have you seen that anecdotally among your community in Tempest?
Yeah, I think, we've seen like a 500% increase in web traffic. So that's one way you can look at it.
500%
increase in web traffic to Tempest. Yeah.
Holy cow.
But I think I have one question to go back to the Queen's Gambit piece. I couldn't watch the episode where she came undone. Could you watch that? Or did you have to?
It was painful. I actually had to pause it and walk around my apartment for a bit.
I did too.
It was painful, especially even when I hope our listeners we're not going to ruin it for them. When she's in Paris and she goes down to the hotel bar to meet her friend.
Yes.
I literally was talking out loud to my screen saying,
"Don't do it."
Yeah.
It was really
hard
to
maybe
watch.
Holly, it's because you and I both recognize a little bit of ourselves
our
former lives in that. Like, oh God, don't do it. What's going to happen.
That's right. It's painful, but I don't mean that part, to be clear, was glamorized. I do mean when you look at the actual photography and the way that it still is that, like, there's something about that imagery of powerful women using powerful drugs as if to be powerful, that's an accomplice. I do think that's the thing I'm trying to needle into, which is how it's part of the power pose of who we are. But I can't remember. Oh yeah. So anecdotally, yes, website, like our traffic, website traffic has increased, but I think there's just also, it's not just the pushing of alcohol. It's also the fact that most resources for alcohol recovery are offline. I think there's those intersecting things that are happening at once as a result of pandemic, but also uprising and a number of, just political unrest. So I think there's a lot happening this year that is influencing behavior.
You some time ago wrote a very controversial editorial in the New York Times.
Yeah.
About women and drinking. And you said, quote, "They're drinking because they have so little power, because all they've done is follow the rules and humble themselves, because their egos have been crushed under a system that reduces their value to subservience, likability, and silence.
That's right.
I drank to feel a sense of wholeness that had been conditioned out of me by society, to combat a powerlessness that was my birthright as a woman."
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Not
I wrote that.
surprisingly, I mean, first of all, critics read that and said she's blaming society for her alcoholism or for her
Okay, sure.
relationship, her destructive relationship with alcohol. How do
Hmm.
you answer that?
I think if I were blaming society, then I wouldn't have done anything to actually fix my situation. And I don't blame society. I think that we're all, when we know it and we understand it, the truth of our power is it's enormous. But that's not how we're conditioned. And I think being critical of the systems that exist that keep us from our power and from that truth are the things that absolutely need to be called to the mat to question. I think that statements like that are exactly what gives other women the power to question systems that they're caught up in or other oppressed individuals.
Not surprisingly, that inspired a rebuttal editorial that I'm going to read a portion from. Christopher Dale writes, alcoholism, like any disease, isn't sexist, and whatever perceived gender imbalances or other microaggressions that exist in AA are insignificant compared to the prospect of drinking oneself to death. Holly Whitaker is nitpicking an existential crisis akin to a cancer patient calling chemotherapy racist. But then again, Whitaker doesn't believe in alcoholism, as she says forthrightly on her website. Her problem drinking was all society's fault.
Hmm.
I wanted to give you your chance to react to that, which was
I
in
mean, he's
reaction to
allowed to
your.
his opinion. I mean, everybody's allowed to their opinion on that. And I think what's so interesting is that my criticisms of AA were essentially meant to say a system that was built in the 1930s by two white upper class Christian straight cis men may not have in mind the diversity of experiences that exist in relationship to alcohol and alcohol addiction. If I am an immigrant, if I am a Black trans man, if I am of an identity that is not covered by those who created the system, most likely the reasons I am drinking are not covered in that. And those are known as outside issues. And so those things, right, how I exist in a society, whether or not my sexual orientation or my gender is recognized, whether or not I go out every day and my life is at stake because of the color of my skin, those things matter. Those things are why people drink or don't drink. Those things are why people have access to certain systems and don't have access to others. And so I would say that all of that absolutely matters in terms of how we confront, address, and recover from our addiction. Absolutely. And you can't, that was written in late of 2019 or early 2020. That was before George Floyd's death. But we know that those things absolutely matter. They matter everywhere, and they absolutely matter in addiction. So being a woman absolutely matters in how I experience AA.
I think that his reaction to this was that, as he put it, Miss Whitaker, AA's 12 steps and principles were designed to stop alcoholism, a progressive, incurable, and eventually fatal disease that knows no race, gender, or creed.
Yeah.
So and that you're nitpicking at an organization that may be imperfect and continually needs to evolve, but that has still saved millions of people's lives.
Of course it has. And there's no denying that it saved people's lives, but it doesn't save everyone's life. That's like saying we have this one cancer treatment that was developed in the 1930s, and don't question it. Just deal with it, even if it doesn't work for a portion of the population. And so I do believe that those steps, which were, again, constructed to break down male ego, male privileged ego, which have remained unchanged since the 30s, since the audience of AA has shifted and changed. Those may not be, and I'm a perfect example of that, and I know plenty of people, that might not be the right medicine that we need. And so I think if that was understood largely, if we as a society accepted that AA only works for a certain population, which may include other genders, other races, other classes, but if we accept it as a society that it's not the one thing, that there are multiple different pathways that are all as valid, all work just as well based on who you are and your makeup. That would be one thing, but that's not the case. It's changing. But when I recovered, it was not, oh, that's a good idea to not use AA, to not get a sponsor, to not do the 12 steps. It was a question, it called into question the validity of my recovery. And still today, people get fired from their therapists, kicked out of all sorts of different programs for not being able to accept those simple 12 steps or the label alcoholic or a number of other things. We still gatekeep people from treatment if they can't get okay with the steps, with the system, with a sponsor.
Do you wish that maybe you had just simply said there are other ways, as opposed to criticizing a way that other people embrace and feel saved their lives?
I think that, again, when we are talking about a system, right, we're talking about a system, not anyone's personal recovery. I think that gets to the heart of it, which is, why is criticizing a system or a treatment so personal? Why does that attack someone's validity of recovery from the way that they got there? Why does my calling into question whether or not this is right for certain populations diminish the effectiveness someone else has had from it? And so I think that's the more interesting question. It wasn't an attack, it was a criticism. And one, I have great reverence for AA, for anything that exists to help people recover. But at the same time, I also feel, just like the church, no institution is beyond criticism, especially when it's expected to be used by a portion of the population.
When it comes to alcoholism, and I remember talking about this in the book talk when you and I first met, about my skewed, really screwy idea of alcoholism and feminism. Like, I thought I couldn't be feminine and be an alcoholic. And I don't know where I got that notion.
Like, you'd lost your womanhood from dealing with it.
That to be an alcoholic was male. I mean, speaking of these kinds of, whatever, archaic ideas that we had, I grew up with or was raised with. It just felt, I mean, I lied to my boss when he called me, when I said I need to go to rehab, and he called me and said point blank, what are you addicted to? And I was so shocked. I didn't have, and I thought, if I just say alcohol, it'll feel so unfeminine. So I threw in Ambien, because of course that's feminizes. I mean,
right.
Give me a
Valium,
break.
benzo,
Oh my God. It's, I'm embarrassed to even tell that story, but I have heard other women talk about that. And I sometimes still flinch when I hear a woman say, I'm a drunk, like in a meeting, I'm a drunk. And it'll be like, oh God, don't call yourself that.
Right.
And yet in some cases it might be true. I mean, what do you think that means about the way we define ourselves and see ourselves?
Yeah, I think all I can think of is that it does feel like it's so interesting, because I do remember having that very clear feeling too of losing some like feminine mystique, losing some of my femininity. But when you're watching, again, I hate being spoiler alert on Queen's Gambit, but when you're watching that, I had to fast forward through the parts where I couldn't let her be that. And I think that's shadow work, right? That's the idea, like the Jungian idea of the shadow. We're the most disgusting thing. Or Pema Chodron talking about, we're just pus and blood and snot and, like secretions and skin and bones. But I think there is that, for me, I think it is really hard for us to maintain this idea of what we are supposed to be as women, and also to confront how utterly disgusting addiction is.
Right. It all looks very feminine the night before when you're holding the Cosmopolitan at the, in the candlelit bar. It's not so romantic the next morning.
It's disgusting.
When you have a hangover and
that's right.
Can barely function.
That's right.
Holly Whitaker, it's so great to talk to you.
It's so good to talk to you. I just have to say, I just, watching you for years, it's just, thank you for being so brave for so many of us that needed you to be. So,
well, Thank you for being so brave and for taking the shots and answering them when, I like that you're out there and you're a strong, smart advocate for sobriety. And maybe you got there a different way, but you know
That's
what?
right.
Although it doesn't matter how you got there,
Doesn't
you got
matter.
there.
That's
Right.
right.
So anyway, the book is Quit Like a Woman. She's got a great program called Tempest. Check it out if you're interested. And it's great to see you again, Holly.
It's
Thanks so
really,
much.
really nice to see you. Thank you.
All right, take care.